Good evening. I am delighted to welcome you to tonight's event, and on behalf of New York University, School of Continuing Professional Studies, and the Center for Publishing, we are so delighted to see so many of our alumni in the audience, as well as our students, faculty, board members, and other members of the publishing community. Tonight's event would not have been possible without the New York University Office of Alumni Relations and the Center for Publishing. Their partnership in co-sponsoring this event was extraordinary, and we're grateful for all that they did. The NYU Media Talk series is highly acclaimed for its focus on key issues facing the publishing industry. Speakers in the past have included leading executives in the book and magazine industries, as well as those in the forefront of the digital transformation. This is the 14th of these public forums, and once again, the conversation will involve the shift to digital, and in this case, where books are going in the 21st century. And we are very fortunate to have with us on stage some key members of the Center for Publishing Faculty and Advisory Board. We thank them for their commitment to our program, for their commitment to this event, and for the spirited dialogue I know we will be listening to tonight. At this time, I would like to invite Andrea Chambers, our director for the Center for Publishing and the creator of the NYU Media Talk series, to tell you more about tonight's event and to introduce you to our esteemed moderator and panelists. Thank you all. Enjoy the event. Have a good night.
Thank you, Dennis. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the latest in the NYU Media Talk series. We're so pleased to have you all with us this evening and to co-sponsor this event with the NYU Office of Alumni Relations and to really collaborate on this important conversation about a topic that we debate vigorously and I would say endlessly in all of our programs. I would like to thank Kate Gavulis, Judith Jackson, Anna Kondulis, and everyone from the Alumni Office who has worked so hard on this event, as well as our own Center for Publishing staff, Jennifer Goodwin and Doris Elsifar, for their hard work as well. And now I would like to introduce to you our moderator, Michael Cader. Now, Michael is the founder of Publishers Lunch, the world's largest circulation book industry publication, as well as its companion website, publishersmarketplace.com. Michael is also the co-founder of the Publishers Launch series. You know, we tell students coming into our program that Michael's publications really are a must-read for anybody interested in the latest industry news and analysis. And of course, Michael himself is known as a sage and chronicler of the book publishing industry. So Michael, we're very happy to have you here with us this evening. And now I would like to tell you a little bit about our panel and our panelists. Now, in putting together this rather global topic, the future of the book, we wanted to be sure to include multiple voices and multiple viewpoints. Who's doing new and creative things? Who's thinking about and experimenting with new formats and new business models? Who has seen success with print and been daring with digital? Well, the answer is everybody on this stage. It is my pleasure to introduce to you our panelists tonight, and for full bios, may I refer you to your program. Judith Curr is Executive Vice President and publisher of the Atria Publishing Group, a division of Simon Schuster, Inc. Judith is one of the most successful publishers in America with a long string of best-selling authors, and she is a member of the Center for Publishing, Faculty, and Advisory Board. Next to Judith, we have Peter Balis. Peter is Vice President and Director, Business Development, Global Digital Books, John Wiley Sons, where he is responsible for the management of electronic sales and distribution, including projects related to ebooks, POD, mobile applications, and global business development. Peter has also painstakingly put together our course on ebooks and ebook transformation. Next to Peter, we have Tom Turvey. Tom is the Director of Strategic Partnerships for Google. Now, when you talk about Google Books in the city, you are very often talking about Tom. In over 9 years at Google, he has managed all of Google's content licensing arrangements with all print media companies globally across books, magazines, news, and journals. And Tom, too, is on our Center for Publishing Board of Advisors. Next to Tom, we have Peter Gethers, who brings another and very different viewpoint to our panel discussion tonight. Peter is president of Random House Studio, which turns Penguin Random House books into feature films, as well as into scripted and unscripted television shows. Peter is also senior vice president and editor-at-large for Penguin Random House. He's a published author of 11 books. He's a televised television writer, and he's a playwright. So a warm welcome to Michael and to our panelists. As you can see, we really have it all up here on stage tonight, those who are reaching out in new directions to help all of us figure out where the book industry and where books are going. Now, please feel free to tweet about the event this evening, and our hashtag is NYU Media Talk. Before we get started, I'd like to say just a few words about your co-host this evening, the Center for Publishing. Now, we too are watching the future of the book. We're also watching the future of the magazine. We're watching the future of digital. Our Master of Science in Publishing program, Digital and Print Media, offers a 2-year immersive study of both book and magazine media, taught by the leaders in the field, some of whom are, of course, on stage tonight and many of whom are in the audience. Our MS program offers a robust internship program, many industry visits, and increasingly becoming more and more global. In fact, this fall, our students traveled to Rome to volunteer at a major magazine conference. They went to the Frankfurt International Book Fair to volunteer there, and they just came back from the Middle East, from Sharjah in the United Arab Emirates, where they volunteered at the Sharjah International Book Fair, and more to come. In addition, we offer a 6-week intensive, the Summer Publishing Institute, for recent college graduates and young professionals. We have executive education programs in New York and globally, and next summer we're starting a new program for high school students in book and magazine editing. Now, if any of you are interested in more information about our program, there are brochures at the back of the room, or catch me or a member of our team at the end of the program. And now, I think it's time to turn the conversation over to Michael and to our panelists. Thank you.
Great, thank you for the warm welcome, Atria. Thank you to the New York Center for Publishing for hosting us, and thanks to all of you for taking some time out of your evening to join us. If you see us going like this, it's because it's actually a beautiful spring day up here on stage, and we're just trying to make a little eye contact with you. We're going to speak among ourselves for a while, and then we're going to try to leave some time for questions at the end. So we hope that you'll have questions with you now, or you'll formulate some during the course of our discussion. The session title, The Future of the Book, can obviously mean lots of things to different people, including all of your panelists. What our hosts told us they meant when we talked about it and have asked us to focus on, I'm going to move this down because I can hear the feedback, so you probably can too. Let's get it in the middle here. What we're going to try to, oh, they're playing with the sound, sorry. What we're going to try to look at is the nearer-term future of the next 1 to 3 years. So we're not going to be venturing into microchips that are implanted into your head with the entire Western Canyon with the mere thought of your mind. It's in the Wonder Lab in Bryant Park. You can go see it. We're going to cheat a little on the word book, however, since we have an audience that mixes professional colleagues and publishing graduate students along with book lovers and general readers interested in what's on the horizon. So really our conversation is going to be a little bit about the book, but the book doesn't exist by itself. So we're going to be talking about publishing and authors, the ebook readers, and more. Now, we were supposed to start with the easiest question of all, which was going to be to have our panelists tell you a little bit about what they actually do, since you've heard their titles, but that doesn't necessarily tell you what they do. As we found out in our little green room in these transitional times, that's perhaps the hardest question that we're going to have to ask anybody today, but we're going to start with it nonetheless, so you have a little sense of all the different things that our panelists do. And to make it easy, why don't we start with Judith and work our way down the line.
Okay, well, good evening. Thank you for having me this evening. And I was pondering this question myself and asked my staff exactly what it is that I do every day. But apart from answering questions, as the president and publisher of the Atria Publishing Group, I now have incorporated different imprints. Howard Books is a religious publisher in Nashville, so I'm now managing some remote teams, which was quite new for me. But basically, I'm responsible for the fiscal health and the continuing business practice of Atria's Publishing Group, and the editorial direction and the marketing, publicity, all of those functions all report up into me. But what I'm really trying to do is to form some kind of some visions and some pathways that my staff can then follow along, because they're so involved with the day-to-day and the practical applications of all these immediate changes that are happening, and people's expectations. It's for me really to be the lamplighter and to find new ways in which we can solve some of the problems and to give them a sense of direction.
Thanks. Peter?
So mine's a little simpler. And I didn't ask the people who work for me because I'm still suffering from the last 360-degree evaluation that I got from them. No, just kidding. So I'm actually really lucky. I oversee a really, really talented global team of individuals who are dedicated to the existence and the growth of Wiley's core digital book business. And this is sort of part and parcel of what we do every day. What does that mean specifically? It means working with existing accounts and moving into new markets or existing markets with, folks like Tom and other companies besides Google with whom we work. But more, I would say my focus recently and our team's focus has been not the traditional retail channels or the traditional road to a consumer and a reader that we would have had in the print world that's migrated over into ebooks, but more about how this digital book, which is part of our core publishing program, can find its way through new business models, and that would be through B2B relationships and other new transactions that we just never would have thought imaginable in an analog print world.
All right. So I think my job is simple, but maybe you'll tell me whether it is or not. I manage a team that manages the company's relationships with print media companies. So if we need a deal for content, a content licensing deal, the company will turn to me and we'll then turn to a book publisher or a news publisher or a magazine publisher or a journal publisher and do that deal, and then we'll also manage that relationship throughout the life of the deal.
Quick and easy.
If there's no humans involved, then I'm not in the picture. But if we need humans, that's where my guys show up.
God, it's much harder when we work together.
Peter, you can pick one or all of your jobs. We'll leave it open for you.
I have a few jobs, I'm sorry to say, but I will start by saying that Penguin and Random House, as everyone here I'm sure knows, merged, and I could make the case that the merger is sort of bad for everybody in the world except for me, possibly, because of my job. And I'm an editor-at-large for all the imprints, which means I buy and edit books for everybody, which is now 70,000 imprints or something. And in addition to that, which I quite like, but in addition to that, I'm president of Random House Studio, I assume eventually renamed Penguin Random House Studio, and we're turning books from all the imprints, all the divisions worldwide, if we find them, into television shows, scripted television shows, unscripted television shows, and feature films. We've made 2 features, two feature films so far. We have a hit television show on the Food Network right now called Heartland Table, a cooking show. We've just made several deals. We just sold our first scripted television series based on a Carl Hiaasen novel to Spike TV. So me and my very small group, a group of people who cry all the time because they have so much work to do, we literally cover just about every book that's published by Penguin Random House to see if it can be turned into something else.
Great, thank you.
I also write, by the way.
Yeah, we could spend the whole evening on Peter's other jobs, but that's why we have time later. So as we're reckoning with the future, obviously part of getting to the future, particularly in exciting but dynamic times like this, is wrestling with the challenges that are before you and the opportunities that you're trying to get to. So just to set some more context, I'm wondering if each of you can talk briefly about what's the biggest obstacle or pain point for you right now that's keeping you from getting to the future that you'd like to get to. Peter Balis, you want to start us?
Sure. I don't know if there's one. I think I have sort of 2 or 3 that are interrelated, and it's really about the reader, the person who's ultimately consuming our content. I think the biggest challenge that we presently have is about the bandwidth of this particular reader, how much time she or he has to actually consume a book. habituated patterns about buying, what they want to spend their money on, the value of a book versus things they are accustomed to finding for free on the web. And then lastly, just understanding, what it is that customer wants or needs. We are a frequently disintermediated business enterprise, and so sometimes really understanding that customer can be a challenge. These are all things that we work to overcome, but I think those sort of things all related to the reader are probably top of mind.
Judith, I know that reader is very much on your mind too. Is that the same focus for you, or do you have a different approach to the question?
Well, I have a slightly different approach. One of the kind of frustrating points at the moment is that no matter what you do, nothing is guaranteed. Once upon a time, you could do an ad in the New York Times, you could put the books out the front of the store, people would come, people would buy it, you'd get a review on the New York Times book review, if you're lucky, and then you kind of have a predictability of what the sales would be. But nothing is predictable anymore. You can push all of those levers and nothing will happen, or press none and something will happen. So part of what's happened, I think, is the fragmentation of the audiences. So if I want to send something out to a blogger, there are 10,000 bloggers. So I have to reach 10,000 people to make sure I've reached 100 people that I really want to speak to. So that is the biggest challenge at the moment, I think.
And Tom, you're 9 years or so into building what aspires to be a mammoth business. What's the next hurdle for you to get through, or what's the next challenge to take what you're building to the next level, do you think?
Two things come to mind. This year we launched bookstores in over 30 different markets, and so I spent a lot of time on the road, both this year and also the year before, preparing for that. And what became really obvious when you go outside the U.S. is the lack of cohesion around things like categorization, pricing, things that transfer the information around rights, the core kind of back-end infrastructure that we take for granted often in the U.S. or UK markets or Canadian markets even, that is just really coming around in certain parts of the world for print, much less ebooks. So there is a sense of having to rinse, repeat every time you launch a new store and have to kind of start from the ground up. So it really has in a way that is now really clear, but maybe 2 years ago I would have said that's a really boring topic. But the idea of standards and having standards that we all agree upon, from EPUB to BISAC for categorization, is critical. Because otherwise, it's very difficult to communicate across international boundaries. The other thing that I think is a real issue that we have to think through in this market and others is how do we expand the ebook footprint to encompass the full range of content in the book business, which it is not today in the U.S., nor is it anywhere else. But if we want that market to grow, it really has to represent all the different verticals that exist within each book market, and it's really representing a very small fraction today.
Great, so that leaves lots of little seeds for us to pick up on. Peter, I'm going to spare you because you already said your problem is too much work and not enough people to do it, unless you want to throw something else into the mix.
Well, I do actually, because I have
I
have so many problems. I have a constant migraine, but
pick your favorite.
But the one interesting problem I have is people, especially people of a certain age, got into publishing to accomplish something very specific, and in a very, very traditional book-centric world. My biggest problem and my biggest headaches are actually convincing all the many editors and publishers within the giant now Penguin Random House complex to shift their perspective and go, you can't just be a book editor or a book publisher or just sell rights. It's really now about rethinking everything to control as much content as you can to take advantage of the talent that you publish. And so my big problem is really explaining to people, well, we have to think about starting YouTube channels. We have to think about producing a television series. We have to think about this. It's hard, it's a complete mind shift for a lot of people who got into the business for a different purpose.
And can you teach people who learned and have practiced one thing to do that, or do you need new people to accomplish that?
Well, like any business, it's a combination of the two. It depends on the person. It depends on, I mean, it's not an age thing. It's really how open you are and how interested you are. Some people have no interest in what I do as much as I can make it sound appealing. And some people have an incredible amount of interest, and they go, so I can talk to my author and we can try to create a television series that will help brand the author and help sell books, or we can try to do something completely different. I mean, there's no yes or no. It depends on the person. It depends on the type of work he or she does.
Perhaps continuing education can play a role there,
Yes.
too. So ever since ebooks have started to take off, everybody likes to play the guessing game of, how far along are we in this story? What's our score? What's our score going to be tomorrow? How does the story end? Inside the business, as those of you in the audience who work in publishing know, the current state of that game is assessing the leveling off of growth rates for at least some kinds of ebooks. What does that mean? Is it temporary? Is it a necessary outgrowth of the size of the market itself? And I'd sort of expect that each of you have a different vantage point on this. So rather than trying to get everybody to coalesce around one number that means nothing, I thought maybe we could break it up a little bit. Judith, as a trade publisher, you're publishing both commercial fiction and nonfiction,
Yes.
which have very different adoption and transformation rates. So how does the state of play look to you now, and where do you think, have we settled in, or do you still see dynamic change?
Well, I see category creep, if you like. So obviously we publish a lot of commercial fiction, and we have authors that have many books in their backlist. So there's been a lot of conversion of those books into ebooks and people buying them. So they'll buy a whole body of work now. And our fiction can be as much as 60% or 65% of that author's book sales, print sales being the other part of it. And before it was non-fiction would be sort of half and half, or maybe 10% of the print books would be ebook sales. But now I'm starting to see the digital editions of non-fiction books outsell the paper editions of those books, particularly for subjects that people want to have privacy around, and particularly books that are sort of hot at that second. So I just saw it on the Today Show, I'll download it, rather than remember to go to the store for it tomorrow. But in cookbooks, which we publish quite a significant amount of, there's very little ebook marketplace for those at the moment. So it's category switching places.
Right. And Peter Balis, it occurs to me Wiley might portray some contradictions here, since you've been withdrawing from a lot of your trade publishing programs, where nonfiction, we know, as Judith said, has often converted to digital more slowly than fiction. And yet in your core areas of academic, educational, and professional development, it's a very different picture, very different from even perhaps what we see in fiction, right?
Yes, but I think we see the same sort of segmentation that Judith sees, which is that we have areas of our business. I mean, we've had a digital journals business which has been almost non-print for over 10 years now. I mean, that was the first wave of our digital migration began really in the late 90s, early 2000, when institutions and researchers really migrated away from a print journal model. All the way to textbooks, where we have great success with our proprietary formats, but students, at least at the university level, the higher education level, have just not embraced the move from a print to an electronic textbook to the same extent that they have in areas of nonfiction, where we can see in some of our tech book business and some of our business book business upwards of 60% on select titles. It really just depends. It's also amazing to see the power of deep backlist that just will take off because of an author franchise, or because of the opportunity to actually, as hard as it is for discoverability in many ebook sites, it's interesting the ones that just suddenly find their way forward either through a blogger or through the media, whether it's the Today Show or some other type of appearance. So I think we're all over the place. I think the thing that we're much more interested in is how it's potentially leveling off. We are not seeing the same, at least from an industry perspective, We're not seeing the same dramatic numbers. They're still very, very healthy numbers, but like any sort of new thing, there's deep penetration from the early adopters, the people who bought devices early on, and now I wouldn't say it's plateaued, but its mountain climb is starting to level off, and that's just something that's important for us to consider as we look forward in our business models.
And Tom, as you said before, you're in many, many countries and launching in more countries all the time. So what does the larger worldview look like? Is it a matter of waiting for everyone else to catch up to the US and other world English territories? Is each country going to display its own ideas about what converts, when, how, at what prices, or are we all eventually veering in the same direction once standards and stores and digitization take root?
Yes. It's interesting because it's been said before, but I think when you think about the impacts of technology, they're typically overstated in the short run and understated in the long run. And so you heard it here first. It's very hard to predict the trends from year to year when you're in the middle of it. And in fact, I don't know if you all remember this, but I think it was 2003, 2002, 2003, I think Forrester predicted that by 2005, at that time, the ebook business would be $3 to $4 billion, and it would be swimming in it. And of course, we're now at the place many years later where the ebook business in the U.S. is somewhere between $3 and $4 billion, we think. So it's sometimes the timing of these things is not what some want. If you take it up a level, I would say we're in the first inning of this transition internationally. Maybe you make a case that we're in the second inning in a few markets, in a handful of markets, US, UK, Canada, maybe one or two others, where the ebook business is double-digit percentage of the overall book business. In most markets we're in, and most markets everyone is in, the ebook business is not a double-digit percentage of the overall book business, not even close. So we've got a very long way to go for this transition. So the question is, do you think the existing ebook market has met its saturation point or its flattening point? Or do you think it's at a pause while we try to figure out how to bring other verticals into this part of the business? And I'm of the latter side. I think that we've got a lot more, evolution is not, for those of you that study biology, not Lamarckian. You don't go from, amoeba, to human form on a straight line. There's a bunch of bumps that Darwin found. So that to me is the way this goes. It goes bumpy for a very, very long time, and eventually you pick up different parts of the business that maybe right now seem impossible or very hard.
Don't you think it's also affected by the fact that this thing that we call a book is going through this transition digitally, so that we have that one entity, which is just the difference between one format and another. It's just a book that was in print that we now have digital, so it's really just a facsimile of that thing. Yep. And there's that one track. And then there's this other track, whether it's about morphing into YouTube and other things that content becomes, but it's these other places that this digital content and this book makes its way out into the marketplace. And I think we're wrestling with two different things. I think this plain thing, if it's just a format difference, is really just a personal preference for the reader, and we're not really making any value proposition except to say, well, now you can carry this small thing with multitudes of books in it. I think the more interesting route of the evolution is going to be what that other side of it becomes. And I think that's going to be very interesting to see as some experiments at the very basic sort of interactive level have been spotty success-wise at best, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Well, it depends whether the digital revolution creates a new way of storytelling, whether the generation that's sort of always had the digital book will read and experience things in a completely different way and read and write different stories. And that's usually what's going to happen.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you guys have said. I think the interesting part that I think is often forgotten is the bigger part of the book business, at least from a revenue standpoint, is not the trade book business, right? But it gets 100% of the media representation.
Right.
But the other parts of the business, which in some cases, as Peter pointed out, on the journal side, have been digital for a very long time. And there are some really good lessons, I think, to learn from those folks. In fact, one of the things that I always regret is when the media conglomerates began to buy trade publishers years ago and began to buy only the consumer publishing piece, the others were sold off. So Prentice Hall was part of Simon Schuster at one point, now it's part of Pearson. But there were a lot of really good cross-learnings about evolution of how markets become digital that are then lost because these things are split up and reconglomerated elsewhere. And I've often wanted to, I think a publisher like Peter's, which plays in a lot of different parts of the value chain, may have a more overall evolutionary picture about how these things work, and that you can cross-learn much easier than maybe just a trade publisher.
But even just looking at journals, I think what really accelerated that migration was that the digitization of journals was not about making them facsimiles of the print, but assigning an entire taxonomy and an ability to search across multiple journals and find information faster and easier, and really, and this is really what Wiley's transition is all about, is making learnings faster and better and more improved. And there was a real value proposition to what that digitization did for researchers. And I think we have a long way to go on sort of the more of the consumer side of digital publishing to get that kind of penetration.
Well, I have a slightly different concern because I'm pretty cavalier about formats. I basically have a very simple point of view that a book is a book, and I don't actually care how anyone reads it and how they read it or what format they read it. And I'm pretty sanguine actually about the future of physical books. It just depends what kind. I think there will always be books that are works of art that people want to display and touch and have. There are other books that are more discardable. To me, a whole new worry with the digital age is that people get used very quickly to getting things for free. And it's harder and harder, I think, for authors to make money. And that's a real concern. And there have been some legal cases that are disturbing about copyright. And that is a whole probably other panel, and maybe I shouldn't have raised it, but it's
all
but the format itself is books are going to survive. People are going to read and in whatever capacity, and that's that. But it opens up so many other cans of worms.
Sure.
Tom, do you want to touch any of those worms?
Not that I'm.
No, I was
good.
just
He
going to.
recently won a case. He's very happy.
I know.
It's not worms, but it's about thinking outside of ourselves. So if with digital publishing, I think forget all the individual devices that ultimately everybody's going to use their phone, particularly in like South America and in Dubai, where we've just come from, or India and those places where physical transportation of things is impossible. So what it allows many people is access to books and access to knowledge and access to information that they've never ever had before. So you can have an education revolution throughout the world rather than worrying about necessarily what happens to our trade publishing in New York. I mean, it's much bigger than that.
It is, and I think that, not to pat ourselves on the back, but I think the book publishing industry has done very well relative to other industries trying to make this transition. You had some very smart people invest very early in standards. You had content that was forthcoming that was either being digitized by the publisher or they had help. And the market formed in a very effective way, I'd say, for authors and everyone in the value chain. It wasn't the music business story. It was the opposite of that. It was an industry that was very well prepared, and there were some bumps, but it wasn't like there was this giant crisis and then we rebounded. It was always a steady flow, and the top line for the industry has grown. Okay, let's be clear, right? This is not, we haven't had to have a bailout here, which I'm very proud of. I think the industry did.
But we take it.
Yeah, but we take it. So I think that's worth saying. And I think the way that we did this was right.
And is pricing a driver of adoption in new markets or a byproduct?
Yeah, asking me?
Yeah, you're the only one who could talk about pricing.
Okay.
So that we know.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. In markets that are not price controlled, I think that you can make a case that it has some impact on the adoption of ebooks, right? In other words, if there's not a law mandating a certain price.
Yeah.
So, because that obviously, that's one lever that you can pull. There are others, obviously, that have to kind of create the whole ecosystem in the country. One of the struggles that we have right now is that we have to understand pricing for different markets. We have to understand that locally. You can't kind of command and control from the U.S. what prices should be in Korea or anywhere else, which means that you have to have a pretty sophisticated understanding of the local market and give guidance to those that are your partners outside that market of how they should price. Otherwise, the whole thing's kind of futile. And that's something that, if you're launched in over 30 markets as we are, it can become very time-consuming. And we go back to people like Peter and Judith's company and say, listen, we're going to launch in XYZ markets, and we need to make sure your books that can be sold there are available, and they're available at a price that is good for that market. And sometimes that requires a lot of back and forth. And at the end of the day, you're asking yourself, why are we doing all this for X ebook market, which may be not existent at that particular moment, but still requires some real thinking and some attention.
But it's worth noting that while most of us on this panel are uncomfortable about speaking about pricing in specifics, with regard to the strategy about pricing for emerging markets and other areas, it's great that we have partners like Google that come to us and are growing their business in these areas. But it's more about some of the things that Peter was saying, which is about sort of addressing what pricing and penetration can do in an emerging market relative to piracy of print. So, when we look at pricing in certain markets, we're very aware of what physical products are out there that are being pirated, what the price point has to be to replace that with a digital purchase. We look at pricing with regard to, if you really want to start talking about other things, our strategies around the licensing of our content versus the sale of our content, because of what that can do to long-term licenses vis-a-vis the used book market. And so when we're pricing electronically, we consider a whole host of things. We can see what books are out there and what they're priced at on Amazon Marketplace, and those are sales that we're not necessarily participating in. So they're all, there are a whole host of things that we take into consideration. It's not just in new markets.
Well, the other challenge is the shrinkage of booksellers, which is going to have a huge effect on what's going to happen on everything. I mean, that everyone is dealing with, but that's an issue that's going to be dealt with a lot more over the next few years.
There's so many things I want to follow up on here. I have to get my sequence correct, so I'm just going to go back to my notes. We'll come back around to them all. One of the things that we talked about when we prepared for the panel was also the idea of how publishers themselves might change. And I know, Judith, you've been thinking a lot about sort of that idea of imagining what a publishing company of the future should look like or might look like. Can you share some of those thoughts with us?
Well, if you look at all of the different parts between the writer and the reader and all the touch points in between that a publisher is currently involved with, each of those presents a vulnerability. So just with acquisitions, for example, we sort of rely on this ecosystem of agents coming to us more or less, or us going to agents with ideas. However, what happens if something is wrong with that ecosystem? So do we have any ability to reach out beyond that community and get the reader submitting books directly to a publisher? So there's one part. I could imagine a day where you can have sort of outreach. People who self-publish may have given that up and may want to go to a traditional publisher. So your source of supply of new material is a vulnerability. So I would see that there you have to look at that. Then, with your marketing and publicity, for example, we have, as I said before, with bloggers, there's like 10,000 bloggers. So what I've noticed by reading them all, they're very competitive, and what they look for is readers. And what a publisher is good at, technically, is finding readers for material. So we've created this thing called the newsroom. So we've invited bloggers with the password protected. They can come in and see us every day. We make the news, you break the news, and pick up material for their blogs. So that's a new way of creating our publicity outreach. So instead of it being us going out to all of the people there, finding a way for them to come into us and get stuff, then they can we had a breaking news story on Friday. So we got picked up by 350 blogs. They all broke it at the same time. We had 7,000 likes. I mean, that's a new incarnation. So you have to think about how that affects you. You have to think about how do you present your materials and your metadata and all of that. So do my covers need to move? Do they need to actually be some kind of animated system that when you click on them, they tell you like someone shoots somebody and you know it's a murder mystery? I don't know. There are certain things, like how is that material going to be communicated? If there aren't very many, how do I get people to experience things? Because people still like physical as well as virtual. And if you've got, we just did a thing at Mohican Sun with 3 fiction authors, a ladies' div. We had 350 people turn up. And as a result of this outreach, Google approached us and they wanted to get involved and do some kind of virtual Skyping with those authors. So there's a way of marrying the two together. So what you thought was one way, it now has to be thought about. And then I haven't even talked about editorial. It's like, well, what's the role of the editor? How do they manage the expectations? What kind of publishing responsibilities do they have to that work? And how often should they change the metadata? Every time something new in the news takes place, they should really go in and change all the references for that book so it comes up at the top of the search. And they're just off the top of my head.
Can I just,
It's a good list.
with all the problems that we're talking about, the kind of thing Judith is talking about, it's publishing is an exhausting thing if you're 60 and have been in it for 35 years. But if I were 21 or 22 years old, I would plunge into this business before almost anything, because the potential is so exciting right now for exactly what you're talking about. I was just having a conversation with a sort of big-time film executive who just left his job and has the luxury of picking what he's going to do next. And he was talking to me and he said, well, what do you think I should do? And I said, you know, the key right now is not to limit yourself. What you want to do is be in a position where if you're, I don't like this expression, but if you're in the content business, it's to be able to do everything. And as a publisher, and the future of publishing is you're going to find a project and you're going to go, this should be an e-short that we should sell for $1.99. This should be a book that we should do as an ebook and a paperback simultaneously, and here's how we should price it. This should be a high-priced paperback that we should charge $50 for. This should be a television series. We should develop this as a film. The potential, if you have the right mindset, is kind of staggering, I think, and that's the fun, plus all the fun of figuring all these new, I mean, fun is a relative term, but the idea of how to sell this in marketing, it's fantastic, the potential. It's just aggravating when you're in the middle of it right now.
My cheap stock summation of that is, in all the people I speak to, it seems like everybody outside of publishing thinks it's a great business to get into, and everybody inside publishing thinks it's a good business to be working their way out of.
Except they're
Except
Except our panelists. No, many people love the business. But it's interesting to see people from outside seeing much more boundless opportunity than the people inside. And I don't know if that's because they don't know how hard it is to get there, or because they're not so historically framed by what's possible and what isn't. And that seems to me it's the dialectic between those two.
Yeah, but it's also
ladder.
one other thing. It doesn't require capital in the way that it used to when all the old publishing companies started up.
Right.
The cost of entering is very inexpensive if you just start. Use your time. Depends how much you charge, but you know.
Right.
But it comes back to love. I would say that, you know, the majority of my students, you know, they want to get into publishing because they love books. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. They're not doing it because they couldn't figure out what to major in. Many of them have had prior careers and they're pivoting themselves. But at the core, when I ask, you know, I start every semester and I ask all my students, you know, why are you here? Why are you taking this class? And it all starts with, I love to read, and I want to be a part of that world. And, you know, you made a significant pivot coming from, you know, Dior and makeup over to that, and, you know, that's actually similar to kind of what, you know, Wiley is doing now is making a similar pivot to sort of going from one area to another. But the reason, you know, that this becomes successful for people who participate in it is because they actually care about the work that they do. And this young generation, whatever they bring to the table that's different from those of us who are old and have been embedded in it for some time, is that they will bring that same passion that we had when we all began. And that's what's going to keep it lively and you know, viable and robust.
And they'll bring a new flexibility to the same business, too. It's exciting.
And they are growing up with technologies and understandings that, you know, we're grappling to keep up with. You know, I'm still on Foursquare, and now I have to like move into something else. I mean, I'm so behind, and you know, it's just great to be surrounded by people every single day at work who live and breathe a whole new life of social media that I just don't. And that's what makes, you know, large organizations great to be in.
Well, and one obvious place we're seeing that with the zero barriers to entry that Judith mentioned is self-publishing, where essentially hundreds of thousands of brand new one-title publishers are being created every day, every week, every month. Tom, I'm wondering, Google was the first major company to develop this big-scaled international platform to put publishers' books online. But it seems like you've been hanging back at the end of the line in terms of letting authors directly use their platform to put themselves online. What's the rationale there, and is that something you see changing soon?
The rationale is publishing is hard.
Yeah.
And we recognize that. You know, just putting a shingle up and calling yourself a publisher, I mean, you could do that. People do that. But, you know, it's not terribly thoughtful. And it really is a business meant for some other end game, I would say. You know, to call yourself a publisher, I think people, at least at Google, those of us that run the platform called Play Books, all mostly come from publishing. So I spent years in publishing myself, as does most of my team. And I think, you know, years ago when all of that was just starting, the self-publishing movement, we discussed it in depth and in detail, and what the opportunity was and really what the upside was, et cetera, and decided at that time that it wasn't a move that we wanted to make for a whole bunch of reasons, but mostly because I think we assumed that others were probably underestimating the work involved and the cost involved. And I don't think we were wrong about that. So our platform is very much for anyone who is a rights holder to come and sell their content. We welcome anyone, individual authors or publishers that you see on stage, all of which are partners. But I think that there is something very significant and different from taking that and then moving it to a platform that is truly a publishing platform, which I think requires different kinds of investment and different kinds of expertise and a different mentality.
And Judith, through Atria, you've been bringing a number of authors who self-published digitally successfully and bringing them into a traditional publishing model. And more broadly at Simon & Schuster, you guys have been sort of more ready than some to make unusual hybridized deals with authors who have had success finding an audience online and then want only print or only distribution or don't want the whole package. Is this the beginning of the breakdown and atomization of the publishing model, or are these one-offs?
Well, I'll just speak to Atria because we've all got slightly different things that we've done. So in the last 12 months, I've signed up like 14 authors who started their careers by self-publishing them. And we're calling them indie authors. And that implies that it's like an independent kind of film studio model, that they've already done some of the work themselves. And so we're there as their support, where they write about 4 books each a year. So it's a completely different model. You have to be really, really fast. Their audiences are very loyal and very committed to them, and they follow them on Twitter and their social network. So part of what we're doing in their publishing process is finding them more friends as we go along, but we're running it as a separate entity, and a separate kind of model than what we're doing with our regular publishing. And the things that we've been learning as a result of doing that have been tremendous. What you were saying before about learning from the kind of the educational model, they've taught us a tremendous amount, and vice versa. And it's been, I have to say, it's been fantastic. But we're actively calling it Atria Indie Authors and branding it as a group. And
that's great.
So far so good. Well, anyway, you never know. But it's very interesting. They're very smart. The good ones are really smart because they know that they need the publisher to help them, because they've come to the point where they can only do so much, or they can sit down and write another book. And we're looking for the ones who are keen on writing the next one.
But it used to be, I know when I first started in publishing, people used to go, well, why don't Stephen King and the top authors just publish themselves instead of giving a big chunk away to publishers? And it's because, especially 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, writers were writers and publishers were publishers, and there was a big difference. And there is, as you were saying, a huge difference between the amount of work that has to go into publishing a book and writing a book, and it's a different mindset. But a lot of the people who are self-publishing books have a much more entrepreneurial mindset. And so there's a merger of the two, and it's really an interesting process now.
Right, they had to break out from that pack.
Yeah.
And Peter, from your combined author-editor hats, how do you feel about all these extra expectations that are more or less placed on authors besides writing their books? Is it pure opportunity? What about the authors who actually just want to write? Are they going to get left behind?
Well, it's hard because so many, I'm one of those writers actually, although I appear fairly social and friendly. I'm actually one of those writers who would much prefer being at my computer and then putting a sheet over my head and not talking to people. But it's part of the job now. I had a book come out not that long ago, and I had to go up to my publisher, and they said, you have to tweet, and you have to do this, and you have to do Facebook, and you have to send really stupid pictures of your cat out to the world. And, and I went, you know what? It's part of the job. It's like being an actor. You have to promote your movie. You can't get away with it anymore. It's just too hard, unless you're just at the absolutely top-tier literary kind of writer where you're going to, well, there's no place to get reviews anymore, but if there were, you're going to get reviews. But it's part of the job, and I think authors are getting used to it, and they are surly on the inside and smiling on the outside. That's the job.
That's a good way of putting it. So the new business model of the moment is subscription models, which may mean it's going to pass right through quite quickly. Certainly the talk right now is focused on general trade subscriptions, which actually may or may not lend themselves to what readers are looking for. But if you take a step back, we've actually had subscription models for all kinds of content, and even for book content for a long time, in very specific ways. Peter Balis, I'm thinking maybe you have a pretty long view here, so I'm wondering how you see the sort of current mania within the business for subscription models, and where do you think it's all headed? Is this going to pass through, or are we at the beginning of a radical transformation in how books are bought and sold?
So you said something that I think is important not to overlook, and that is that there have been subscription models, but let's be very clear about what those subscription models were. So instead of I'm going to read one book a week, or I'm going to read one book a month, and I'm going to have the Netflix model where I'm going to pay for an annual or monthly subscription, and I can consume as many of those that I can in that time period, over the course of a year. The subscription models that have existed to date, and I assume these are the ones you're referring to, are sort of aggregated content subscription models where, digital book content is placed into a repository. There is search functionality spread across all that content. One can, ask a question and get delivered up a series of results based on that content. So it's not about consuming a book in its holistic form, but actually the availability of all of this great content on an annual subscription basis. So this would be the Safaris of the world, the novels of the world, even models like eBrary and other aggregators offer this. And those models are usually have been a traditional licensing model where there's actually an advance against royalties for the content. So it's really not the type of subscription model that I assume you're referring to today with the Oysters, eReadas, and the Scribs of the world coming out. Do I think there's a place for subscription to continue? Certainly the older model, I think, will only continue to grow. You're providing an incredible resource and a service to any corporation, any company, whether they want access to books on technology subjects or books on leadership, whatever it happens to be. In terms of the more consumer-based model that's coming out today, you know, I step back and I actually ask, you know, how many Hollywood studios are ecstatic about the success of Netflix? You know, and most of them don't seem to be. So, you know, my position as a publisher, just not even at my own company, but just as part of a publishing industry, is, you know, to sort of step back. I think the interesting thing about book publishing sometimes is that we imagine that there's this great demand for something, that people are clamoring for book subscriptions. Oh, I would love to find those people who can actually read 25 books a month, you know, and break these models. I think that we are a little ahead of the demand at this point in time. I think we are trying to find solutions for things that are out there, and I actually think it's going to be a little bit of time before there is that sort of broad-based desire to consume that many books in a subscription basis.
Well, there's another problem with the subscription model for a publisher, is publishers are not traditionally business-to-consumer businesses. We're business-to-business sellers, and so there's always been a middleman. And to make a subscription model really work, you almost have to go directly to the consumer, which is something publishers have never dared to do in the past. So it's another problem.
And,
Well, I just want to make one quick comment. You were saying about, you know, the people who can read 25 books a month. Where are they? They're actually the people that we really need to keep reading 25 books a month and buying 25 books a month. Not to put too fine a point on it, because it is a business. So the subscription model is coming from the outside, from all these people who want to get into publishing, and they've got a business model as opposed to a product or a. And the very people who really are the lifeblood of the book business are the very people who will be adversely affected.
Tom, there was a point at which Google prominently envisioned offering repository-style subscriptions across vast amounts of books, at least to libraries and institutions, if not to individuals. Has that been left by the wayside, or is that a plan we're going to see come back in some form?
Nothing to announce at this time. But to get back to what Peter was saying, I mean, that proposal, which was part of a larger settlement, was in fact in the market where subscriptions for book content have made money, right, and where there is a market there. And having worked at one of those places Peter mentioned before coming to Google, I did the math, so I know that there's a market there. I think that on the consumer side, there are other very big challenges to making that work.
I just want to go back to something that Peter said, which is this idea about publishers not being very good at getting direct to customers. I would say that, and I can't speak for every house, but I would say that it was much worse a few years ago. I think the call to increase, CRM and all. I mean, there's not a publisher out there today who is not investing in this type of thing and actually doing a much, much better job about reaching that customer. And I think that actually with regard to subscription, that's one of those interesting places where our strategy at Wiley at this point in time, outside of that sort of aggregator that I've described, is actually to focus on our direct-to-consumer relationship and actually broker some subscription model or something, if that demand exists, specifically for a type of content, specifically for a brand like the For Dummies books, whatever it happens to be. But I actually think it's a great way for publishers to perhaps get into direct-to-consumer relationships and not have to be disintermediated.
There was a thing in the paper today with Dr. Dre and Jimmy Iovine for Beats. They make these headphones, and they've made a big announcement to say they're going to have curated content available. And he's a they're music producers, and they're in that business. So it'll be really interesting to see what that is, because that's the first time we've seen anybody actively pursue proactively pursue the business of music publishing and music distribution.
With curation,
Being the big
yeah.
thing. So it would, and they're not, there's a secret. They're not saying what it is. They're just saying that it's
Just
a
a
secret.
big ad with a headphone
Yeah.
from the New York Times. Yeah.
Well, and
pages,
curation is
so
a
it's
great theme to end on, because I think we want to finish by talking more about readers, which all of you guys have talked about some so far. The traditional publishing model, and this is for the publishers on the panel, is based on the idea that the publisher is curating. But you're now curating in a sea of infinitely expanding content. And at least in your case, Peter Gethers, as you mentioned, your company is now vast itself and has books spread across dozens and dozens and dozens of imprints. Is that idea of curation still a service that you can actually provide that readers will recognize? Or?
I actually think more than ever, the great thing about the internet and all the digital publishing is that it democratizes everything. The scary thing about it is that it democratizes everything. So you need curators more and more, because most things that are published, going back to the really old-fashioned model, all you have to do is find out why publishers close their doors to unsolicited manuscripts, because 99% of what you got were not good. Most of the stuff that's self-published probably wouldn't pass the curator test. Not all, obviously, but most. So I think over the next few years, the idea of being the curator is going to become more and more important, because you have to have somebody to trust in a democratized world like that.
And do we think what you curate and what you curate and what you curate is going to look any different when all it is a listing online? Are you going to be able to communicate or connect to your readers that you're curating in different ways for different people?
People find that all the time. I mean, in all different forms, people go to brands and things like that that they're used to.
It does require a mind shift, though, for publishers, because we're constantly having this argument. Do people care about the imprint name, or do they not care about the imprint name? If you talk to someone from Penguin, they'll say they really care. If you talk from someone from somewhere else, they say they don't. So we haven't really been paying attention to that. So part of what we're doing with this indie experiment is putting Atria's name on everything and creating a kind of a club, a community, and hopefully that's a little step forward, but otherwise it's just a list of things on the internet.
I think in the history of publishing, someone I'm sure is going to now prove me wrong, I can think of 2 companies that have ever branded themselves successfully, and that's it, which is Penguin in England, not here, and Harlequin. I can't think of, no one ever goes into a bookstore and says, can I buy a Knopf book, or can I buy a Random House book? It doesn't happen.
So
Lonely Planet. What about that?
Or
yeah, travel, I'm sorry,
right.
very specific, yes,
and
travel.
I would say FSG,
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
people know what the type of authors that FSG tends to publish
I don't
and
think so.
acquire.
I totally don't think so.
I think it's less,
Healthy disagreement.
I think partly it's more about a potential imprint than it is about an overarching company.
Right.
And I think it's actually very different in the type of world that Wiley exists in than, say, in a traditional trade environment. You know, I just came back from 2 weeks in Asia, and I can tell you that I meet with accounts that specifically say, we want Wiley content. They know that brand, and it means a huge amount to them to have that content as part of their platform. And that is the sort of nugget for them. When we work with, NYU is a perfect example. When NYU and Bopst and the collection managers are working on broadening collections in engineering and architecture, they know by publisher who they acquire from less than they know who the author is that they're acquiring from. So I think it also depends on the
I'm really
content.
talking about
No,
trade.
I totally,
I bet there's not more than 2 people in this audience. If you said who published the last book you bought, they could tell you.
We won't put you on the spot.
Well,
Yeah.
in a book-loving audience, maybe a
Yeah,
little
maybe the wrong
higher.
audience.
It probably skews a little higher than the general population. But your point is very well taken. But it's kind of maybe the onus is on us to actually find a
Make
way
it
to
important.
give brand equity to things. And I think that a lot of what Judith's doing at Simon & Schuster is to say, okay, maybe Simon & Schuster as an overarching brand isn't going to be it, but you've given editors their own imprints. You've really found a way to create brand equity within your Atria imprint overarchingly.
Right.
And just to get you into this conversation, Tom, early on in Google Books, you guys actually made a very concerted effort to sort of flag book content and make book content more easily discoverable as something that was vetted and curated and established as being worthy of your attention. And then in the sprawl of Google as well as the sprawl of the project, that's kind of faded away without putting Google itself on the spot. Is there a technological answer to helping make discovery and curation and guiding people digitally towards what they might want out there? Or is the problem so vast that it's really has to be done author by author, imprint by imprint, house by house?
Well, it's going to sound incredibly self-serving, but the more content that becomes available online, the easier it is for search engines and others to pick it up and point to it and make sure that it's part of the conversation of the information that you find online. If you're, and this is, and maybe was a controversial idea in the U.S. 10 years ago, and is now a controversial idea in lots of other parts of the world today, but is no longer here. So the idea that books were sort of invisible to search engines 10 years ago was in part what led us to begin digitizing books to begin with. And that idea, of course, is no longer true in the US anyway, for the most part. But it is true, as I was mentioning before, you can almost track the evolution of the ebook business and see where it is true still in certain markets. So we're doing our best to help out there. But just having the content available in full text, partial preview in a way that sits alongside search results from other places makes it relevant to everyone using a search engine, and that's everyone, by the way.
Right.
So it's just having it there is a huge benefit.
I mean, the tricky thing is, Google is the perfect branding example because 10 years ago or 12 years ago, you never heard of the word Google before, and now everyone knows it. But publishers, their job has always been to brand authors, to brand something very, very specific, and to be in the background. That's part of the challenge of changing.
Yeah.
All right, I think we want to let the audience in, if I can see you. And do we have a microphone, Andrew? Okay, so I guess do we want people to make your way to the microphones, and whoever's fastest will get to ask first?
You need sunglasses.
Yeah.
All right, why don't we start to my left?
I need one of those green visors.
I think we're going to have to be louder for us, so they'll have to turn on. There we go.
Good.
Yes, thank you.
Hello. Hi. Given the melding of print and digital, what's your opinion of why enhanced books haven't taken off?
Given the what? I didn't hear the second word. Given the
In your opinion.
melding.
Melding.
Well, I don't think people sort of, we've done some which are instructional, and if you use them, they're very useful. However, I don't think people know that they exist or what an enhanced book really is.
Yes.
I think that's the problem.
I think discovery has been a huge problem. The majority of the retail intermediaries with whom we work, and I'll use Amazon as an example, has, just quickly in the room, does anybody here know where you would find a book with audio and video when you're looking at an Amazon detail page? You know those little plus signs that are barely visible? If you keep clicking down and opening it up, eventually at the very bottom, it will say with audio and video. It is really very, very hard to find those book products. And also the challenge has been that they don't work across every single device.
Right.
They're not going to work on a basic e-ink device, so it's hard. That's one of the reasons why retail accounts have probably been slow to merchandise them, because they can't make a commitment to every consumer that it can be read on every device that they sell or every device that the consumer owns.
And I think some of it, too, is which enhancements are we talking about, right? I mean, we are seeing an uptake of books that have the audio embedded so that people can go back and forth, because audiobooks are an established market. People know what they are. They like them. Sometimes they like the audiobook and the print book, so that was a more natural first step melding, and we may get there in bits and pieces rather than here's everything we can do, now put into one wrapper. Aren't you going to love it?
Or foreign language instructions, you know.
Right.
We used to put CDs in the back of every foreign language instruction book, and now you just press it and you hear all the pronunciation, and it's like having a teacher there with you. I mean, that is a true enhancement.
Right.
I think it's been a struggle in some of the more, fiction narrative ideas where it potentially interrupts the experience, but that's a whole different conversation.
Okay, you're up next.
He actually asked my question.
Oh, okay.
But I have another one.
Well, we're happy to see you.
I'm first in line, and he got me anyway. Peter, earlier you mentioned that in an ideal world, a publisher can hear an idea and say, okay, the ideal implementation for that is this format or this medium, et cetera. And I'm still wondering why it seems the typical book, or at least the fiction book, is still 300 pages long or more. And I seem to feel like I've read a lot of books lately that had that extra 80 or 90 pages that they really didn't need, and yet it seems that that's sort of the box that books have to fit in. I'm wondering if
You try cutting those 80 pages when an author wants them in the book.
like, I know that Times started marketing some of these e-singles a little bit recently. I'm wondering if you're seeing, is there more of that coming out, a 100-page book or a 120-page book, if that's the right size for the material?
Yes, I think there's no question about it, and that's definitely going to happen more and more. A simple answer.
All right, back to this side.
Hi, I'm nervous. So
okay.
it seems to me like America is a country with a lot of impulse consumers, and I was just wondering why there aren't good books at the checkout stand of every grocery store next to the batteries and the gum and the candy.
Well, because the batteries, they've just done they're not selling as much chewing gum at the checkouts anymore because people aren't paying attention at the checkout. They're on their phones. They just did, no, this is true, they just did a big study about this. So, but before the chewing gum experiment, that real estate was very expensive, and the publishers couldn't afford it because of exactly the reason why it would be very good.
There's another answer as well, is the book industry is a sort of shockingly small industry. Books can get on the New York Times bestseller list, which is a national bestseller list, and sell 20,000 copies. I mean, a norm would be 100,000 copies, but books have gotten on with much smaller figures. It's not a huge, broad across the country industry. The percentage of people who buy books is relatively small, especially compared to other European countries.
You have to pay for that real estate.
You're next.
Hello. I'm assuming that at least one person on the panel knows something about what's going on at Google. And so my question is the following. What do you think the impact of Google Glass is going to be on the future of reading and of this whole publishing situation?
Oh, Andrea paid you to ask this question, didn't she?
But I plan to get the money later, but please answer the question.
I can honestly say I have no idea.
You're not authorized to know that answer.
I'm not authorized to.
What do the other people on the panel who might have at least heard some scuttlebutt think about that situation?
Don't wear them and drive. You get in trouble, evidently.
Get a self-driving car.
Yeah, those still freak me out.
Thinking ahead.
Yeah.
Get a Google car.
I haven't heard anything.
Yeah, if the
I
car's
think-
driving itself, then you can sit in the back seat and read, right?
Can I answer it a little differently? So, Tom was talking about old Forrester research, and I have this gigantic file that I keep in my office where I just throw things that are of interest to me that I use when I go to teach every year, and that's how I build my lectures. And I went back and I found, all this old stuff that I sort of pontificated about on, what the great potential of tablets was going to be to our business, and my forecast was triple-digit growth, and what we realized is it just increased the distraction potential for every tablet owner. So what do I think is going to be the future of reading for Google Glass? Having seen what happened, I don't necessarily think it's going to be a great advantage to reading. I think it will be a great advantage to answer getting.
Good answer. You're next.
Hi. For those of you with the glasses on, are you reading a book right now? No, I'm just kidding. Industry leaders like Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg, not publishing industry leaders, but industry leaders, have said that two guys in a garage can disrupt their industry. And it really concerns them, then to some extent they have fear of the two guys in a garage. Do you follow or watch for emerging companies and emerging business models that, in fact, might disrupt the publishing industry and what you do? And what types of if so, what types of models have you seen out there that might be something that you need to adopt or that you're concerned about that you can't do as a large company?
Well, one thing I've noted, one thing someone said to me at Kobo, they self-publish, they've got 225,000 self-published authors on their books. They can tell when someone stops at chapter 6. They don't read it anymore because everything's in the cloud. So where I think that the future could be is that information could be fed back to the authors to say, look, you've got a problem here with chapter 6. So you could sort of cloud source, if you like, the content of the book. And that information is not available to the publishers because we're not the people who have the devices or who are hosting the materials. So I think that that's a potential vulnerability for us.
You could cut those 80 pages.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
With data.
With data, yeah. You don't need that last third. Mr. DeLillo.
Yes.
He's in the audience. You're next.
Hi. So Peter, I was really intrigued by the idea that you mentioned of the crossover between film and publishing. So you talked about how publishers can go out to an author and say maybe the best way to build your brand is to have a TV show and like a paperback. So I was just wondering, are publishers really in a position right now to kind of make offers like that? And what can a business like Random House Studio offer an author that the film and TV industry can't?
Good question.
We can offer a few things. The answer is yes. I mean, not all publishers are in a position to do it. Happily, we are, and I am. And it's a hard road to hoe because we have to first convince not just authors, but agents. And as I said earlier, we even have to convince the editors I work with that we can do this. And the more success we have, the easier it's going to be. But I think we can offer several things, and I'm going to sound a little bit cynical here, but one of the things we do offer that we've proven correct already in the couple of films that we've produced and the TV series we have on is the television and movie industries are, how shall I put this delicately, mean, horrible, nasty businesses. And one of the things we do as the production company that is also their publisher is we can offer a lot more protection for them and give them a lot more involvement and get them involved creatively. We can't protect authors 100% because no actual writer can be protected 100% in the TV or movie business, but we can protect them 75%, which is a big plus. We can do all sorts of cross-marketing. Again, for the food show that we have on now, it came about because we had access to the proposal for this cookbook. We met the author. I thought she was a real star. We made a sizzle reel. We sold it to the Food Network. We do as much cross-promotion as possible to both not only make her successful on television, but to sell as many copies of the book as possible. We made a movie. I'm giving you the successes instead of the failures, but we made a movie. We partner with Focus Features on on feature films. We made a movie called One Day with Anne Hathaway. The movie was a moderate success. Financially it was okay, but in America we sold 1.5 million copies of the book. And in Germany, where Random House Germany published it, we sold over 1 million because of the cross-marketing and the way we published the book in conjunction with the publicity from the film from day one. So there are a lot of advantages. I'm making it sound a lot easier than it is, but to me it's extremely exciting because we can offer an author all sorts of potential and possibilities. We can't guarantee that we're going to get a TV series made or a movie made, but we give them a really good shot, and we're having a pretty good ratio of what we develop and what we try to make to what we make, probably better than most studios. Does that answer your question? Kind of?
Yep, that answers it.
Great. All right, Andrea says we have time for 2 more questions, so we're going to get 1 more from each side, and then I think our panelists will be available off stage if you still have things to ask.
Thanks. I had a question. Peter asked how many people in the audience know who published the last book they read. And I pulled out my iPhone and I realized that the last 12 books I read were published on Wattpad.
Were published what?
Wattpad.
Wattpad.
And,
On Wattpad.
So I have, a question. How will that kind of publication change the publishing industry?
It'll put me out of business.
Yeah, well,
It'll put us out of business. I mean, that's the simple answer.
I don't think so.
We
The
may have time for
authors-
an extra question.
Thanks for depressing all of us, by the way.
Well,
Anybody
I think
wanna
the
say
authors on Wattpad are looking to come to you guys next for a book deal. I think they practice and they learn there, and then they're hoping to be your partners in the future to make money.
Well, I think that's what Judith was really talking about
Yeah.
early on with self-publishing and her successes, right?
Yes, with
Yeah, I
this
mean,
kind of like
Sourcebooks
a
is actually
practice.
working with Wattpad officially now to help take some of their authors and give them publishing deals, and they have a cross-promotional arrangement going on where they're sort of working together. So there are a lot of authors who are building their careers on Wattpad and then crossing over to more traditional published forms. In part because Wattpad's more about stories rather than long-length narrative or building up stories, so it's very easy to read on a mobile platform. But
Can you spell what that is? What, W-H-A-T?
wattpad.com. It's a service that helps people publish their stories for free and has developed a community of people it's about 20 million people worldwide reading and writing each other's stories. The interesting thing is a lot of they have more uptake outside of the United States than inside the US, and where it's really becoming a very rapidly growing platform is in a lot of developing countries where there might be less traditional publishing infrastructure that's putting works online and making them available digitally, and so people are flocking to where it's easy and where they can find each other and sort of, I think that's perhaps the more disruptive aspect of it. It's building a new kind of digital publishing industry in places where the traditional businesses and architecture hasn't gotten
But I
there
think
first.
the answer, what publishers can learn from that, is that they have to figure out a way to build publishing, reading, writing communities. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Yeah.
All right, you're our final question.
Yes, Peter G. I want to back you up a little bit on how difficult it is in the film industry. Getting a book, getting something written and then put on the screen. I wrote, produced, and directed a motion picture called Man in the Mirror that got Martin Sheen and some other actors to star in. And of course, it took me 26 years to finish it. But I got it done.
That's fast.
And I did make my money back. My question for the panel is looking at nonfiction. How political is it? To select, how political, what role does politics play in nonfictions? And one book comes to mind, Dead Aid by a lady named Mayo. And I believe Steve Forbes put a great deal of money behind helping to get the book published, helping to get the book not published, but processed into, released and things like that. What role does it play? How important is that, politics? And I ask that, and I'll conclude by saying that you're publishers in the US or in the Western world, but the entire developing world community is exploding with ideas. What are we looking at? Are we looking at domination from this side? Are we looking at a more open market so that we can get this material? I'll end it there.
That might have been 4 questions
I was going
in
to say,
one.
we'll be
Do
here
you mean
for 2 hours.
Do you mean politics like is the author a Democrat or a Republican, or politics like who do you know to help get it published?
You selected material. If I brought you a nonfiction book, say on do you have a return ticket, a book that deals with, say, Africans in the diaspora who are returning home to Africa wanting to get their land and their wealth back. How does politics play a role, if it does play a role, in you selecting a nonfiction book?
Well, for me, it doesn't really play any role, because it's whether the book intrinsically is a book that we could feel that we can publish and find an audience for.
That's right.
And if it doesn't fit that criteria, we don't publish it. And if it does, then we would publish it. And even if someone says they're a friend of the boss's, that we still don't publish their book if it's no good.
The connections are irrelevant. What is relevant is what an author brings to the table, not who he knows, but does he have some kind of platform? Does he have X followers on his or her blog and things like that? Does he or she have a magazine column, or are they on television or whatever? Sadly, that's more and more important. Ultimately, it boils down to the book. This may sound a little bit naive, but I think there's almost every publisher in the business is looking for any advantage they can to sell. If they like something enough, they're going to take it on, no matter that there are no advantages. That's what I think.
Question. Thank you very much. Good answer.
Well, thank you very much to our panel. Thank you to all of you for engaging with us. I think Andrea's going to get the last word. So.
Well, you're a great audience with great questions, right? I mean, weren't they really? We always tell our students that book lovers are really curious and interesting people, and you've proven the point tonight. So thank you for the great questions. And thank you to our panelists for really bringing the future of the book into the here and now, for helping us understand all of the seismic changes moving into our industry, and how we as publishers and lovers and observers of books and readers of books really should sort of take all of this and formulate it and process it and make changes. So a big round of applause to our moderator and our panelists. They all did a fabulous job. Thank you very much for sharing your wisdom and your wit with us tonight. Thank you all for being here. We hope to see you at the next Media Talk, and really thank you very much, and enjoy the evening. Take care.